everyone, I'm Miss Lydia from the Boston Library. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we are going to be making some fall crafts using leaves and watercolors and some googly eyes as well. You can do this on just regular paper. I'm going to be using watercolor paper because it is a little thicker. Now depending on what you want to be using as your base, exactly which project you're doing, you can use cardstock or just regular paper as well. I have some different leaves here and some grasses that I'm going to be using, and what I'm going to be doing is making animals out of these leaves. So I have a couple of different animals planned. I'm going to do a hedgehog, a fox, and a squirrel. And what we're going to do is kind of create a little template for each animal and then fill in a part of the animal with the leaves. I also have some decoupage paper here that I picked up, or you could print off and cut out leaves too if you wanted to use flat paper leaves. So you can use either real stuff right off the tree or printed paper leaves and cut those out as well. So my first step is to create a template. The first picture that I'm going to do is a hedgehog. So I'm actually going to put two little hedgehogs on here. The only parts of them that I have to draw out are the faces and a little bit of the body of the one. So I'm going to have them facing each other. I'm going to draw out a little bit of a face here. And put his nose right at the end there. And then on the other one, I'll start with his nose here. And then a little bit of that face. This one's going to have a little bit more of a smile on his face. And then we'll go down. You'll see a little bit of his belly and his legs too here. Now this doesn't have to be too terribly involved. So if you look at my picture there, you can see a very slight template here. Then I can use either the watercolors or a variety of colored pencils, crayons, anything that I have on hand to fill that in. So I'm going to start with some watercolors here, and I'm going to do a darker outline and then fill in with a lighter brown in the body. And then I like googly eyes, so I'm going to use a couple of googly eyes for them. And then once I've got that done, I'm going to build out the body with my leaves. So the very loose and free watercoloring, I have about that design. And what I'm going to do is let that dry, and then I'm going to go back over it with a fine tooth Sharpie just on my edges to kind of give that a little bit more definition. And then I'm going to start gluing in the rest of my hedgehogs. And while that's drying, I'm going to start on my squirrel. So a very similar process, and what I'm going to be then using again is the leaves to make up the tail. So I have to draw the squirrel body, and then I will leave that space. You want to carry a little bit of your color into where the tail area is going to be, and then that means that you don't have to be as careful with your edges. You can kind of blend that just a little bit. So again, taking my pencil to give my first outline, and I'm going to just really carefully freehand this. And if you don't want to try drawing it yourself, you can always print out a template and then just glue the leaves in. So if you're doing this with a smaller child, or if you don't feel like you can draw that well, you can just print off a template and then have fun just gluing in the leaves. I always like to have a little bit of something to go off of. So I'm using a picture off to the side here that's going to give me a little bit of inspiration here. Because if I was just drawing a squirrel from memory, I don't think it would turn out very well. So I'm just very, very lightly tracing that in. You can see just a little bit of that. And then I'm going to use my watercolor again to fill that in. So I'll take my brush and go in with just a little bit of that brown. So again, keeping it very free, there is my squirrel template. The nice thing about it is you can, if you keep your pencil markings light, you can kind of revise it as you go. He ended up being a little too skinny, so I just kind of went a little further over. You can erase things, you can kind of move your lines around a little bit. I left it so that I can put it so that it looks like he has an acorn in his hands too. So again, I'm gonna set that one aside. and move on to my fox template, my last one. And this one, the fox is going to be laying down. And I thought it would be really fun to use the grass as the fox's fuzzy tail. So I have my inspiration piece off to the side here. Again, picking up my pencil, and I'm going to kind of start the fox outline here. My fox template, because he's sleeping, if you can see that, it's very faint at this point, is going to be very simple. And then I'm going to use a little bit more color variation in the fox so that I can get a little bit more of that reddish color. So I'm going to start with that color, and then I'll layer in a bit more of the brown, and then I'll add in the black accents. And then with a mixture, again, keeping my technique really loose and kind of freeform, there is my fox template. So at this point, my hedgehogs are definitely dry. So I'm going to take my marker, do a quick outline on them. I'm going to color in the noses with this marker too, to give those nice black noses on there. And then I have just regular Elmer's glue I'm going to use for my eyes first. So I'll get those googly eyes on. And then I'm going to take the Japanese maple leaves that I have because they're kind of spiky. And I'm going to use a whole bunch of these to make up the rest of the body of my hedgehogs. So I'm just pulling all the stems off. Now these, because I didn't press them, will curl up a bit. I'm okay with that. You can also press them once it's on the paper. So if you're not using a googly eye or you don't get a lot of definition from that, you can end up pressing these leaves after they've been placed. So I'm going to basically just kind of put down a bunch of glue where I think my hedgehog body should be on both of them. And then I'm going to start sticking leaves down. It's easiest to work from your outer edges in. And you will get glue on your hands if you're doing it this way. And once I have that one layer down, I'm going to kind of work my way in just a little bit more. And then you want to make sure that everything's pressed down really solidly. And then we'll do the other side. And then if you feel like you need to, you can always add another layer of glue, another layer of leaves to get the look that you're going for. And then I wanted it to look like this hedgehog is actually handing something off. So I have a small little leaf here, paper one, that I'm going to use and make it look like an apple. So I'm going to glue that down right where his little hands are. And then I'm going to use a piece of one of my other leaves, actually 2 pieces of it. To look like part of the stem. And once that's done, you have hedgehogs made out of leaves. So I'm going to let them set aside there to dry, let all that glue dry. Once I know that the glue is dry, I am going to set down something over top of it. So like a piece of parchment paper and then a heavy book. Let those leaves dry and flatten for a little bit just so that they don't curl up. Onto my squirrel. For the squirrel, I'm actually going to use some of these pressed leaves, these paper leaves. So I want him to have a nice red bushy tail. So I'm just going to separate out a bunch of the red colored leaves. And I'm not exactly sure how many I need, so as I'm separating them out, I'm going to kind of layer them in just to kind of get an idea of how I want his tail to look. Once I feel like he has a big enough, bushy enough tail, I'm going to move my leaves off and I'm going to start building that, gluing them all on. Now for this one, I'm actually going to start at the top and work my way back down so that my stems are underneath. Now that I've got his tail done, I want it to look like he's holding onto an acorn. So again, I'm going to use this same one that I used for the apple. I'm going to pull off the stem and glue it right into where his hands are. And then I'm going to use one of the darker leaves. You could use construction paper or anything like that too. And I'm going to cut out a small acorn cap. And there's the finished squirrel. The final one is my fox. I initially thought I was going to use my fuzzy grass, but I don't have quite enough of it to give him a big bushy tail. And when I was holding it up, I actually really like the way these 9-bark leaves look, so I'm going to use those instead. And I'm going to add my glue. He's going to have his tail kind of wrapped around his face. So we'll add some glue in and around. And again, kind of starting from the tip. So I'm going to pick one of my smaller leaves to start out at the tip of his tail and press that down and work my way back. And with that pressed down, there's the finished fox. So again, with this one, since this one and the hedgehog are both unpressed live leaves, I am going to set a piece of paper over top of them to kind of push them down a little bit. I don't need them to be perfectly flat. I like a little bit of that texture. I just don't want them to curl up entirely. So I am going to put a piece of parchment paper down and then put a heavy book over it for a couple of days once I know that all of my glue is dry. So especially if you're using a template, this is a really easy craft to do with kids. You can go out into the yard and gather leaves of any shape and size and color, and you can do, the hedgehogs are really easy. Those are very forgiving. The other ones are a little bit more complicated because you do have to get the placement better if you are particular about it. But the other thing that you can do as well is to use the same exact supplies and you can make any number of animals. So you could take your maple leaves and you can just put eyes on them, or you can draw a nose, you can turn them into owls, you can do all sorts of different animals. So I'm going to post a couple of pictures under this video that have some links to other ideas for animals that you can create out of leaves. I hope you enjoyed this project. We will be back with lots more fall-inspired projects in the weeks to come. We'll see you then.